Well, good evening. It is good to be here with you tonight. We are grateful to be alive and in the land of the living. We could be, as a friend would say, it's better to be seen than to be viewed. And so we're being seen tonight, and we thank God for the privilege of life. We thank God for the Sheen Center family and for being with you again tonight. We are the Metro Music Singers, and we come from various parts of New York, New Jersey, and this is our first time together for a little while. But we are glad you're here, and we're glad to be with you. And tonight we just want to share a little hope as we sing a few songs that we pray will speak to your hearts tonight, encourage you, and ultimately prepare your hearts for what's about to take place tonight. We thank God for all the speakers who are here. Pray that God will fill their mouths tonight. Amen. You can clap, you can stand, you can sit, but enjoy the Lord with us tonight, all right?
Praise, when we lift our hands Good evening, everyone. Actually, good afternoon. No, good evening. I was right the first time. Welcome to the Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen Center for Thought and Culture. The Sheen Center is a project of the Archdiocese to engage, to elevate, and to evangelize culture through the performing arts and thoughtful discourse. We're so happy that you're able to be with us this evening. Cardinal Dolan, if I get it correctly, it was St. Augustine who said that when you sing, you pray twice. And we're so grateful to the Metro Music Singers for starting off this event with such a prayerful tone. Yes, let's give the... Now, we actually started this conversation way back in September with the first live event that we offered here at the Sheen Center since being in hiatus for almost 2 years. And at the time, we knew that there'd be more to this conversation. We'd have to continue that conversation, which brings us to today. We knew that we wanted to bring together leaders from faith, leaders from healthcare, leaders from the media, and elected officials to really talk and to make sure, to quote T.S. Eliot, that we didn't have the experience and miss the meaning. We've all been through quite a bit these last 2 years. So we really wanted to have this conversation, but do it through a lens of hope. And that's what we hope we leave you with tonight. Hope for the future, and to leave here feeling a little bit better than we felt for maybe the last 2 years or so. So without further ado, it is my distinct honor to introduce and welcome to the stage the founder and chairman of SOMOS Community Care, Dr. Ramon Talaj.
More than 60. Good evening. Before I start my remark, let's thank to the Lord that allows us to be here, present, that without His grace, He allows us to be present to do some kind of information to all of us. Thank you. Your Eminence, Reverend fathers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's my honor and privilege to be part of this gathering of distinguished community leaders. Their contribution to caring for the poorest and most vulnerable residents of New York City during the pandemic, as we know, has saved countless lives. I thank Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York for his unfailing leadership. His love and concern for the neediest New Yorkers has been and continue to be example for all of us. And I say that from the bottom of my heart, sir. And the crucial hard work in the Archdiocese was done by Archcare, whose CEO is with us today here, Scott LaRue. Thank you. Archcare official mission is to foster and provide faith-based holistic care to frail and vulnerable people unable to fully care for themselves. Very close to what the Lord did 2,000 years ago. It requires no further explanation to understand how vitally important, how indispensable this mission to care and advocate for the poor has been during the past 2 years. That is what brings us together tonight. A joint mission, inspired and driven by our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, to serve the most vulnerable among us, always, and in particular way during this pandemic, as we all know what happened. And our common commitment to the welfare to the poorest New Yorkers was put to the test by this COVID-19 pandemic. Like never before. Something that we probably won't see in our lifetime again, hopefully. I salute the Sheen Center for Thought and Culture for hosting this evening of reflection on one of the most important issues of our time, and for providing a platform to engage Catholics and non-Catholics alike, as we all here today. A word of thanks also goes to Aleteia, our friends from Rome. Clearly, during the pandemic, we were not able to save all those under our care. In many cases, we had to learn on the fly. And looking back, there may be things that we could have done better. There's no question. But the important is we did things. However, this unprecedented crisis taught us many lessons. There are logistical, practical lessons that will inform future responses in time of crisis. For example, we were shown the importance of looking after the needs and the plight of the poor from the start, rather than as is happening. I hope you remember that. The initial primary focus on medical technology, such as concentration on fine hospital ventilators. Too late. Equally important, if not more so, are the spiritual lessons taught by the pandemic, such as an appreciation of the value of the life of every human being. All of us being endowed with dignity and infinite value by our Creator, regardless of race, socioeconomic background. That's the way we were inspired to work during the pandemic. We learned it's the spiritual duty to care for the least among us in the form of hands-on care as well as in the form of advocacy. Such a commitment should be at the heart of the U.S. healthcare system. Hopefully, it should be at the heart of the U.S. health system, but it's not so far. We need to change. Together, we have come away with the joy, the spiritual elation of caring for the poor, and faith moving mountains, transforming entire communities. This experience and our corresponding marching order to our future healthcare crisis explain the motto of our gathering here tonight. They truly are a sign of hope for a better world. It is timely that this topic brings us together in the Easter season, when we commemorate and celebrate the victory of Christ over death. Good has defeated evil, definitely. That certainty makes us people of faith and hope, kindness and compassion. That certainty should also drive our commitment to serve the poor, the aged, and the vulnerable people of color. As the Lord told us, I have told you this, that you might have peace in me. In the world you will have trouble, but take courage. I have conquered the world. Lest we forget, ours is a world of suffering, and the poor, the old, and the people of color are weighed down by this proportional share. No question, the equity is not present. What a lot of inequity so far. That become painfully clear at the height of the pandemic. While 29% of the population of the city is Hispanic, 34% of them died. While 22% of the population in New York City is African American, 28% died. While 32% of the population is white, only 26% had deaths. Faith and courage draw SOMOS doctors to step up to the challenge. We lost 12. They give their life serving to the poor. We set up hundreds of testing sites at neighborhood churches, synagogues, schools, everywhere. There was a possibility when nobody even knew what to do. When we told the people, use masks, when still they were coming no clear attention on what to do. We set up some unbelievable record. And not only that, we were the only one with a way to get appointments and get results to people for the whole city of New York at the beginning. Today, our doctors continue their mission to the neediest by vaccinating patients and other practices, helping overcoming patient doubts and fear, and getting vaccinated in the process. We have done every possible partnership in order to, with the school, the churches, because we find out in our poll that the people don't trust politicians, 10%, while they trust teachers, priests, pastors, doctors, nurses, 80%. In the end, as Christ reminds us, good will overcome evil. In that spirit, our doctors are compassionate healers. Tend to community health workers, their eyes and ears in the community. These doctors know their patient intimately, their family, and the living condition, as well as the social determinant of health, like poverty, unemployment. I could say that adversely affect our people's health. That's why so many die. Patients are provided with holistic care focused on medical, behavioral, and social needs. Most of SOMOS doctors live and work in the same community as their patients, with whom they share a cultural and ethnic background. They speak the same language. All this makes our doctors, most of them primary care providers, trusted figures, community leaders, much like the family doctors of all, someone whom patients rely on. Sometimes we are the ones who read the letters from them. They don't know how to read. They come to us. This SOMOS formula has been successful in providing quality care to the vulnerable, the aged, members of ethnic and racial minorities. What's more, that care produced significant savings for New York State Medicaid spending, as patients are kept out of emergency room and costly hospital beds. For example, to illustrate you that, the state of New York told us that we saved $360 million to the state in 2018 in our program because we reduced 20% dialysis and diabetes, 15% amputation. For them, it was a lot of money. For us, my friends, I told him yes. In 10,000 patients, that means that 4,000 of them doesn't have to be wheeled every 3 days to get dialysis. That's wellness happening in that family. That 3,000 of them doesn't have to wheel a wheelchair and be a difficult position to take care of the family, or somebody had to take care of them. Doing that, we help the community. It's more than money, what you bring to that community, taking care of them. Our common mission is ultimately about the humanization of healthcare and move away from favoring the affluent at the expense of the poor, and then move away from profit-seeking toward spending time and energy in genuinely caring for the most vulnerable. In a recent talk at SOMOS, we invite Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, president of the Pontifical Academy of Life. SOMOS sings up powerfully. He stressed that solidarity with the poor implies responsibility toward the others who live in need, and is rooted in recognizing that as human beings endowed with dignity, each person is an end in himself, not just a means to something. The Archbishop added that when it comes to distributing or worst case rationing healthcare interventions, it must always be borne in mind that difficult decisions cannot be based on presumed difference in the worth or giving human life and the dignity of every person. We saw so many times that during this pandemic. I have to have that myself. When my daughter go to a community hospital and they don't have the antibody for her because only large institution will have that. In the end, what must drive us combating neglect of the poor as well as racial and ethnic discrimination in healthcare is our faith in Jesus Christ. In practical terms, that's what we do. Catholic social teaching, which gives a central place to the human person and human dignity, and to the goal of relationship based on solidarity and justice. I hope that my speech today made you think about how important is the kiss, the embrace, how much we need each other. how much we've been away from that in recent time. And I appreciate so much to embrace my grandkids and kiss my daughter and my son. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Talaj. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce the moderator of this evening's conversation. We are honored to have her with us tonight. Please give a warm welcome to CBS News correspondent Elaine Quijano.
Thank you so much. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. How are you? Doing well. Lively crowd, it sounds like. It is my honor tonight to lead this discussion, and we are going to be bringing in our distinguished panelists now. First, Celeste Johnson is the Associate Commissioner with the New York State Department of Health. Celeste, welcome. Hello, Celeste. My colleague, David Begnaud, lead national correspondent for CBS Mornings. David, come on up. And Scott LaRue, CEO of ArchCare. Pull up a seat, sir. And of course, last but not least, His Eminence, Timothy Cardinal Dolan, Archbishop of New York. Is it okay if I share with them, Cardinal, that backstage you asked if there was beer? Afterwards, that's right. As the Cardinal gets settled here, this has really been such a journey for everyone, each in his or her own personal way. So many different experiences, so many different backgrounds that we all bring to this conversation here. And so, we're all facing these similar questions right now. What are the lessons that we have learned from this? What signs of hope actually exist in our world today? And what do we do now? What actions need to actually be taken to move us toward that more hopeful future? So those are going to be the guideposts for our conversation tonight. And I want to begin with you, Your Eminence. When you reflect on the last 2 years and you think about all the experiences you had, shepherding a battered, often broken flock, what lessons do you think emerged for the Catholic Church and faith communities?
Well, for one, I lost 22 pounds. That I will not. I'll never forget that. Folks, could I say first of all how welcome you are, and how what we're doing tonight fits in so magnificently with the mission of the Fulton J. Sheen Center for Thought and Culture. That's what this is all about. And secondly, my high esteem for a man who's been a real beacon of hope for me and so many, Dr. Talaj. Thank you, Doctor, for bringing us together. It's extraordinarily important that we would reflect. I don't think we can exaggerate the trauma, the tsunami of sentiments and emotions that we as a community have been through this last over 2 years now. And it's going to take us a while to reflect, to process, to kind of gather some meaning and inspiration. So it sure is good that we're trying to do that tonight. A couple things that still just I can't shake from my mind is, first of all, a sense of humility. A sense of humility. We heard the world say things like, I don't know what's going on. We heard experts, medical experts, who were asked about this dreaded virus say, I don't know. We're not used to that, are we? We like to claim a certain omnipotence. We like to claim a certain omniscience that we know, if we're people of faith, belongs to God alone. And for a long time, we thought we had all the power. that we had all the answers. And COVID taught us that we did not. So that's my first thought, that there was a rediscovery of humility. It was refreshing for people to shrug together. It was important for people to shake their head and say, I wonder what's going on. Secondly, and Dr. Talaj referred to this, the high value of togetherness. We all learned, it's a cliche, we learned when we were young that man is a social animal, okay? We learned that powerfully. When I would go to bury a priest, and when we could not embrace, we had to gather at a distance around the grave. And worst of all, we couldn't even go out for a beer and sandwich together afterwards, okay? We lost the power, the beauty of being together. When my people said, we miss Mass, we miss the parish, I miss my family. This is a mighty, mighty insight that for a while, with contemporary emphasis on privacy and isolation and the value of being by ourselves, we in the church feel that when people tell us, I believe, but I don't want to belong, we rediscovered the value of belonging, that we need to be together. Nothing can replace a hug. Nothing can replace shaking a hand. Nothing can replace sitting at a table with someone we love and sharing a meal with them. Nothing can replace worshiping God together. We learned that, all right? Well, I'm sure I'll have a chance later to mention some, but you just asked for some introductory comments on what I learned, and those are a few of them.
You know, it's so interesting to think about that notion of togetherness, because this is the first time I have moderated an event since the pandemic, so it is kind of an extraordinary moment to be sitting here next to you, to imagine where we were, you know. And David, I'm going to turn to you next. David Begnaud, by the way, if you don't know, is one of the best storytellers in our business. If you have not followed his work, David was on the front lines from the beginning, taking us into hospitals, taking us to the bedsides of patients who were suffering from COVID. And at a time when we know misinformation and disinformation abounds, David showed us the reality. He brought that to us, and it was at a time when many of us were sequestered, as the Cardinal said, in our living rooms and unable to see for ourselves and bear witness ourselves. So David, with all of that in mind, when you think about the last 2 years, what lessons do you see for New York City and for our country?
You know, so much of what we do for a living in our profession, it's not about us. We learned that in journalism school, the bosses talk about that. But listening to His Eminence, you know, I'm sort of having a moment of sort of channeling the way I was feeling as I traveled the country. And I remember being on airplanes when there was no one else there but, you know, the flight attendants and me and my producer. And I remember going into the Deep South where I'm from. And I remember standing at the bedside of people who were struggling to breathe and who were Catholic, are Catholic like me. And I remember them listening to the priest through the door who was talking to them because he couldn't come in. But they wouldn't listen to the doctor who was in the room telling them why a mask mattered. And as we get older and we spread our wings and we leave the nest and we fulfill dreams that we have, me living a dream I've always had to do exactly what I'm doing, I just remember it being so disappointing to look into the eyes of the people who are my people, the Cajun people, the good people, who will cook for you and welcome you into our house and treat you like family if we just met you. And I watched the willful ignorance. And there were moments where I wanted to put the camera down, the microphone down, and I wanted to say to them, but don't you understand your life is on the line? And so I think, Elaine, for me, one tough lesson was no matter how much you tried to tell and convey the truth, it seemingly didn't matter in some situations. And that was hard to accept. That was hard to accept.
Yeah. It's a painful lesson that I think we all in the journalism community kind of learned. But I wonder for those actually in those hospitals, Dr. Talaj, I'm turning to you next because I'm thinking about the population here in New York and the images that we saw at the very height of the surge. Indelible images of trucks on the streets of New York City, just horrors that we couldn't have imagined, and you serving these vulnerable populations. What are the lessons that you think exist now when it comes to our healthcare system as someone who has focused his energy on serving primarily the Latino population?
I'm a little strong on that. I'm a little bit strong on that because I saw that reality where nobody understood that this virus was going to kill those ones in our buildings because we live with 3 generations. 6 feet apart in an apartment who hold 12 people, 1 bathroom, 1 work. A couple of them were out the window, a couple of them were out the door. And they had to go day by day to work, otherwise they don't bring food to the table. And then when you request, please, let me isolate those people, they don't then come back to the building. And the answer is, we're busy getting ventilator. It was very difficult for me. And difficult for me knowing those patients and family members and friends that we could not find them inside sometimes trucks because we were not prepared. And my mission now, as my friend Mario, the CEO, is to use every single strength to not to allow, I'm sorry to say this, the scholars to take care of the health care of our people because they fail, they hide, they didn't do their job. And we, with the faith in the Lord, who guide us all the time, and I say that strong, He guides us all the time, trying to do something for them, trying to be there, trying to comfort them. You call it TV shows, instruction, whatever means we're trying to find. But the worst lesson is, as I call this virus from the beginning, el virus de la soledad, the solitude virus, as I call the vaccine of hope. Yeah. It's something that is going to be in my mind. The suffering of these people, while I'm alive, I want to leave their wellness in the hands of those one who doesn't understand how do we live, how's our condition, why. We could be poor, but we're humans. We have faith. We believe in each other. We are family. And then sometime it was difficult for me to see on TV some of the richest people, actors, jumping in their room saying they were living in that. And doing this in TV in their own big houses. And I'm seeing people dying in my community because they cannot isolate. And they were upset because they had to be in isolation. I said, Lord, what a difference. We can't let this happen again in the country. We have to change that.
Speaking of faith, it's interesting because I was, as you were speaking, thinking about how, faith is really all that many of us held on to. I mean, there were moments, as I'm sure all of us can relate, where, the darkness feels overwhelming, but that faith allows us to continue with our mission. And Scott, I'm going to turn to you because at ArchCare, your mission is to focus on the needs of seniors and vulnerable populations. And from what you saw over the last 2 years, I wonder what your reflections are on the lessons learned, particularly when it comes to the healthcare system.
Yeah, first, I want to thank Dr. Taj. What he said in his remarks, SOMOS was everywhere during the pandemic. It was one entity the community could count on, and it's something that organization should be extremely proud of. There were probably two things I'd like to comment on. One was the power of the human spirit. We had individuals, as was just mentioned, they have breast cancer, they have children, they have grandparents. No one knew what this was back in March of 2020. No one. How you got it, what it would mean to you, and people were dying. Yet they came to work, they went to the bedside, and they did what they needed to do to care for these people. And that was an amazing testament, not just to the staff, but to the human spirit in general. And it was faith, because only with faith could you have done that. And to have to ask people to take that risk and bring it back to their families was just something you didn't think you'd ever have to do. The second is the value of human life. Decisions were made about who got resources, who didn't get resources, and it had impacts. And I think we have to do a better job of making sure we're not in a position that those kind of decisions have to be made again.
We're going to talk a bit more about sort of action steps later on in the conversation, but Celeste, then let me turn to you, because with this overview of the state, trying to take us back to 2020, March of 2020, as Scott says, the climate of uncertainty, we all remember that feeling. What was it like? What were the lessons, as you look back now, taking away from that experience for this state and the enormous challenges facing the state?
There were many, many, many lessons that we learned. You know, first, I must say, government, at least state government, and I was in federal government and state government, many governments are insular. They give out grants to various organizations, and they check in on them every 6 months, and that's it. This virus forced us to roll up our sleeves and get out and be in community. We had no choice. The devastation that we saw firsthand, the same as what Scott saw, our teams were in facilities, we were in the Javits Center when it was a hospital. We were all over the place, everywhere. But the point that the lesson learned was and is that it forced us to go out to see exactly what life was like, what it was like then. It forced us to work harder. No greater partner. And the second thing we learned was that community-based organizations, especially SOMOS, who partnered with us to set up test sites, vaccine sites, were it not for their partnership, I don't know how we could have done that. And this is not because you invited us or invited Dr. Bassett to come here. That is the truth, because I witnessed it. I was at the test sites, I was at the vaccine sites, and we saw firsthand their good work. But the lessons learned, I must tell you, and Scott, you touched upon it just now, when you said about decisions about resources and who gets them and when they get them, that hit home to the department, I must tell you. We sat and we're doing a lot of hot wash. Hot wash is lessons learned after an event takes place. We are in the process now of looking at the lessons, looking at how we did and how we should have done and how we can do better. But the virus changed the game completely.
Lessons for everyone on this stage. So with that in mind, let's turn our gaze now to what gives each of you hope, because the reason we're here tonight is to look forward, is to look to the future. And so, Your Eminence, when you think about the future for the church, for faith communities, I wonder what it is that you see that gives you confidence about us moving towards that better future.
Sure. Well, look, the fact of the matter is we were tempted often to think that we were in one unending Good Friday afternoon. And now we've come upon Easter. Dr. Talaj mentioned how providential we would gather for this reflective conversation during the Easter season. So there, of course, is the basis for hope. So many people said, how are we going to get through it? And other people were constantly saying, we're going to get through it. We're going to make it. We've been through worse before. It's very interesting if we look at God's holy word in the Bible with the people of Israel, it was in the periods of darkness and disease and war and hunger and defeat that their faith and hope was the highest. It was during the periods of prosperity and peace and health and full bellies that they forgot God. For those years of the COVID, as tough as things were, the power of faith increased. Now, one of the many things that inspired me about SOMOS, you know what they did? They worked themselves to the bone all day. So they were out there with medicine, with care, with professionalism, with hard work. But I would join them in the evening when they would come together for prayer. Doctor, I was with you on a couple Tuesday nights. Did you do it on Tuesday or every night?
Every night.
Every night. They would come together with hundreds of people, their staff, and they would pray. Now, it's that beautiful combination of work and prayer, okay? Faith and reason, if you want to use those classical words, that worked. It worked. We got through it. You know, I just got back from a trip to Ukraine, as you know. And as I met with these Ukrainian people, I saw this remarkably surprising resilience and grit and hope. And it dawned on me, these people are on the honor roll of suffering. Ukraine has suffered through its history, you see. Stalin tried to exterminate them. Hitler tried to exterminate them. The Soviet Union tried to harass them, all right? And it's happening again now, and they always come back. The people of Israel taught us that as well. It's this indomitable resilience in the human person that is based on an innate trust and hope in the Lord, that He will get us through, and that Easter has the last word. We've learned that. We've learned that, you see? And that's the basis of hope. So,
David, I wonder, from your vantage point and remembering back to those images of despair, of sorrow, there were also extraordinary stories you told of the heroism of healthcare workers, of the helpers, so to speak. So as we look now forward, what is it in New York City? What is it for our country? What signs do you see that give you hope?
I think a lesson learned from me was, you know, I had always heard that faith-based organizations had a role to play, right? And it sounds good, and there are departments that do that kind of stuff. But I remember going to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where they were having such a hard time getting people to get vaccinated, that they were doing direct door-to-door appeals to preachers and pastors who would open up the church. This might be a non-denominational church, in some cases it was a Catholic church, and they would get more attendance at that church meet and greet than they ever got at anything they set up at the health department or the hospital or the doctor's office. And I had never seen doctors more despondent and discouraged and somewhat seemingly insulted by the fact that people didn't believe them. The bodies didn't matter, the news didn't matter, but I watched a preacher's word matter. I watched a priest's presence matter. And I thought, wow. And so for me, that was a moment where everything you hear about faith-based organizations being important, it became real. And I think was life-saving to a degree.
Yeah. Dr. Talaj, you know, we've heard so much about the extraordinary work of SOMOS, and so looking forward now, what signs do you see that give you hope for our healthcare system moving forward? Because there have been so many lessons learned, as Celeste pointed out, and we had the experience that you and Celeste of coming together now to draw upon moving forward. So what are those signs of hope that you see?
Let me go for the city first. We have a new mayor who really believes in value-based care and in holistic medicine. He's an example in his own life and how he was transformed to a different type of medicine, the preventive medicine. In the state level, there's just a waiver recently where it will take care of this fundamental principle of poverty, unemployment, and that, to create a different way to do healthcare system. And on the federal level, we're pushing in the same direction, that we would like to see SOMOS everywhere. Not us, but some like us, doing healthcare in the community. My hope is this. The building called hospital is so important for diseases, for illness, for people sick. What about to do a better healthcare in the community? That the less people who use that building, the better we are. The less people who need to go to get amputation, eyesight loss, crisis of asthma. The best we could do outside, and I believe there's a learn here. And the authorities start understanding that we are behind. Our healthcare system is based on diseases, not on wellness. And it should change. And I see a hope. And that hope, forum like this, having everybody here in different direction understanding. And in my case, I hope we could do that and allow us to do that, respecting our belief, our faith, that everybody could do in their own way. But in SOMOS, from my foundation that we have done for everybody there, we have one goal: continue taking care of the poor, feed the hungry, care and cure the illness, as best we could do. Try to the other treat us the way we would like to be treated, we treat the other ones. If we do that, the world will be different. But in healthcare, if we don't pay more attention to prevention, we will continue making the same mistakes. And for me, that's the most important part. The country needs to move, and I believe there's leaders now who understand that, at least in the New York State and New York City level. And now I know, in the Catholic faith that we have, the learning is that I don't want to continue having 40 years from now, we keep talking about the amount of people with diabetes, the elderly, fragile, so many diseases. When we could start working now with our children, education for food, the type of food, the parents, all of these things that we could do now to reduce this, and the healthcare system will survive and will be more, more reasonable for the people who work the most, which are the poor people.
Scott, in your role at Arch Care, when you think about the future.
Sorry.
Oh.
By the way, my prayer starts now. You would allow me a few minutes to start the prayer and come back, because our prayer starts at 7 o'clock. You could continue.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think he had to catch a plane. Is that what he just said, right?
No,
prayer. Oh, prayer. Excuse me.
He starts his prayer.
Oh, prayer.
He'll
Excuse
start.
me.
He'll come back.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Then I'll leave to do the collection.
We really are at a Catholic event. All right. Well, Scott, you spoke a moment ago about the challenges facing, and they're enormous, right? The challenges. And I wonder, though, in your role at Arch Care, are there things that you have seen since then that now give you a sense that the future can be better, that there is some reason to have hope, that there is confidence to be had because certain kind of shifts are beginning?
Absolutely. First of all, there's a recognition of the value of our healthcare workers, our home care workers, our aides that provide the care at the bedside. There's additional funding that's been put in the state budget. There's recognition of the importance of the contribution that they give every day to our elders and those in need. And I don't think that's going to change. There's finally been a clear line of sight to an understanding of how valuable their services. And secondly, I think one of the outcomes of the pandemic is there's a real effort to look at options to institutional care and creating opportunities for people to stay in their communities that they grew up in, where their loved ones are, where they go to church, and where they want to be. And without the pandemic, I don't think that the resources or the effort would have come in any time soon.
Celeste, Scott brings up such an interesting point about the way in which the pandemic really exposed these pressure points within our healthcare system. From your vantage point, overall with the state, when it comes to the future, I'm going to ask you the same question. What signs of hope do you see? What are those things that, Scott points out, the recognition of the healthcare workers, the attention to perhaps different settings for people as they age and grow older. Are there things like that from where you sit at the New York State Department of Health that give you a reason to be hopeful?
Most definitely, and Scott alluded to the 1115 waiver and all of the items that have been put forward to make healthcare not just healthcare, it's housing, it's food insecurity, it's all of the factors that lead to some of the problems of health, some of the issues around health. It also, the future, the department understands better what community-based organizations, they're worth. Wasn't always the case. I must say this. I won't be dismissed for saying that, because I believe people now with this pandemic, and it's shown a light on what the gaps are and were, that we need to partner more vigorously with our community-based organizations and our partners. And one other thing I want to say, when the vaccine was produced and they were getting ready to ship it out, we had big meetings in the department, big meetings. And someone said, well, how do we get to those who don't trust it, that don't understand? And I said, very simple. You gotta hit up the faith-based communities. You gotta go to the churches, you have to go to the Catholic churches, you have to go to the synagogues, you have to go to the Baptist churches. And that slowly was put into our outreach, because that was, again, you're insular and you think that you're doing the right thing, where we're bringing these vaccines. It wasn't enough. So the future and lessons learned are tied up with our experiences trying to bring much needed, preventative measures and vaccines to the public that were in need. So the future, I think, is bright because we've learned from this pandemic.
So that brings us to the next phase of our discussion, next steps. And Your Eminence, when you think about next steps, when you think about how it is we can all move together forward and really take what it is that we have learned, the experiences that we've had, what are 3 possible actions you think that the Catholic Church, faith communities should take now in order to step into that future more fully?
All right. One would be something to which Scott LaRue of ArchCare mentioned, namely the emphasis on the human. All right, this is number one. Most of the time, those in healthcare, those in education, those in communication, you name the profession, we emphasize, and understandably and laudably, the professionalism, the mechanics of it, the technology of it, how to do that stuff well, all right? That's good. Boy, I don't want to change that. Often, though, as Dr. Charles Camosi of Fordham University points out, an unintended consequence of that would be that the person, the patient, would become an object, all right? An object. Sometimes we would not know his or her name. Sometimes we would not introduce ourselves. Sometimes we would not hold their hand and assure them that things are going to be fine. We were almost working in an overly clinical way. And I think step number one is the rediscovery of the heart in health. the rediscovery of the primacy of the human, all right? The sacredness of human life and the innate dignity of the human person, okay? Number two, for us anyway, this is as a leader of faith, you were kind enough to ask, is we have to do a better job of emphasizing the balance, the choreography between faith and reason. We saw two extremes, see, and neither of them were helpful. On the one side, we saw people that said, I don't need all that junk. I don't need masks. I don't need doctors. I don't need vaccines. God will take care of me. Well, you might get an A+ in faith, but you flunked reason. And then on the other hand, you had a prominent state official who said, prayer and faith had nothing to do with this. This was all science. Well, you might get an A in reason, but you just flunked faith. We need both. So when somebody was yelling at me outside of one of our churches because we had heeded what I thought was proper advice at the beginning in closing our churches, as I think our healthcare workers wisely suggested, and when we encouraged people to get the vaccine and said, you might have conscientious reasons not to, but you can't claim a religious exemption because you're a Catholic, because we're for the vaccine. When the person yelled at me and said, why do I need the vaccine? God will take care of me. And I said, you are right. And the way God will take care of you is through the vaccine. So you've got this melody between faith and reason, you see, between theology and science, between the spirit and the body. We have a God who is holistic, okay? We're blended together, mind, body, soul, spirit. It all works together in a magnificent tango. And I think that's a second goal. We've got to get that message around a little better. And thirdly is that we need to double, triple our praise of those who have been heroic in risking their own lives and health to care for others. All right? We've got great people who didn't have the luxury of staying home. We've got wonderful people who knew this is dangerous for me to go into that room. All right? We need to praise them. We need to value them. We need to cherish them. We need to pay them better, okay? Because they are extraordinarily heroic people who really have listened to Jesus, who said there's no greater love than to give your life for another. And these people wanted to do that. So from a pastoral religious point of view, I think those are three things we could learn.
And for individual Catholics, Your Eminence, if you are someone who, I'll just say myself as an example, during the pandemic, I was largely operating out of a remote studio.
Yeah.
Didn't get to really, get out and had a different role than David. But what that allowed me to do was actually begin a sort of morning prayer routine.
Way to go.
Yeah, which was something that now has stayed with me.
Way to go.
Even as we're out and about in the world. Yes, I'm a born and raised Catholic and, 9 years of Catholic school. But when you're a CBS News correspondent, you're not used to being in one place for very long. And routine is not a word that really is in your vocabulary. Yeah. So what can we do to deepen our
religious traditions are built upon routine. Mm-hmm. Some routine can have a negative connotation if it becomes empty and hollow. But most of the things that are sacred in life are routine. They become just a habit, a part of our lives. And religious fervor and devotion is part of that. And we got out of kilter on that, and it was difficult. Interesting, though, people would say to me that this led to a rediscovery of an interior sanctuary about which they had grown callous, that they didn't know that deep within was the presence of God as well. Now, the good thing is, they said, while that got me through, and I'm not going to lose that, like you said about your own prayer time, you're not going to lose that. They also said, but I sure enjoy doing it as I used to in a community with other people. For us Catholics, the sacraments, the Mass, community, prayer, Sunday liturgy. These people kind of rediscovered the value of that. I'm an historian by training, and I don't know if I'm being a Pollyanna here, but I do wonder, throughout American religious history anyway, we've gone through what we've called periods of great revivals. Usually historians point to 3 of them at different times in our history. And I wonder if this is going to lead us to another one. I don't know if I see signs yet, but I wonder if it may.
Thank you for that, Your Eminence. David, I know as well as anyone that as journalists, we are not paid to opine, so I'm not going to ask you to do that tonight. But we are about the presentation of facts. This section is about next steps. So from your vantage point as a journalist, what is it that you're going to be watching for as we move into this endemic phase, I guess is the proper terminology, for what we're experiencing now from public health officials, from government officials, local officials, folks in your hometown of Lafayette, Louisiana, where we saw you report so many days. What are those things that you're going to be looking for that will indicate to you, yes, we appear to be moving a bit closer to that hopeful future?
The largest hospital in Louisiana is run by the Franciscan Sisters, Our Lady of the Lake in Baton Rouge. And they have more beds at that hospital than any other hospital. And I was so proud of what the Catholic hospitals did. And I want to say that some of the best access we were given came from the sisters. In Baton Rouge and in Lafayette and in Jackson, Mississippi and in Monroe, Louisiana, they allowed us inside. And that may seem insignificant to you, but when you are tasked with spreading accurate information, and a doctor gives you the information and then says, please go tell the people, it is really a problem when a hospital doesn't let you in. Because I think what I hope is the next step for a lot of hospital CEOs is the recognition that through the pandemic, we were able to actually help people see the reality by way of the access that we were given. Through the access, we could expose the truth. We could show you the trailers outside the hospital. I could show you the man sitting in bed who had just survived, was not vaccinated, and said, if I could change one thing, that's what I would have done. I'm so sorry I was so hard-headed. So I hope that hospitals moving forward give more access to people like me to come in and story tell that way. Second, I saw a lot of good, God-fearing Catholic people spreading some BS. And they're elected officials. And so what I hope is that to a degree, there will be some accountability. I mean, I watched a Catholic priest pull aside a public official in Louisiana and sort of read him the Right Act and say, listen, you know what the truth is about a vaccine. You come to church on Sunday, and you have a faith-based responsibility, regardless of what your constituents may say. And thirdly, look, I know there's a separation of church and state, and I respect that. But I have an immense amount of respect for what the faith-based communities helped to do to spread the truth and to get people vaccinated. And so, to the degree that we can maintain what needs to be maintained, but also maybe welcome the faith-based groups into the fold more, I think everybody could benefit from it.
Dr. Talaj, as you continue your work at SOMOS, what changes do you think need to happen within the healthcare system to move the country closer to that better future?
I guess that I just a little bit answered my previous. I've seen that happen. I've seen more and more elected officials, people understanding healthcare better, understanding that it's not the same equality, the inequity. Equality, you send to everybody the same, but when you don't do that, where the needs are the most, you're doing inequality. There's two different things. And we saw that. We saw the resources go in different directions. And it was no apply. You know, I remember when they opened the first testing site in New Rochelle, because a party. And I said, who was serving on the party? Probably us, the colored people. We must be sick too. That's when I started moving. Through telemedicine, I found out that 70% of the people from the Bronx and Queens having symptoms who look like that. And that was before the hospital gas. That's when we opened the first testing site beside the stock exchange, to be sure that we say that we open in Queens and then in the Bronx. But I believe these authorities now, the people know now that need to change. Now, the problem is, I'm very careful what I'm going to say here, but I have to say it. The same people, the same scholars, the same institution that failed to act when the situation was in need. Because, let me tell you, I don't blame. Everybody was afraid. Nobody wanted to die. But they cannot be the one taking now the first position to make the changes. She's right. It had to be government with institutions who are willing to risk, who know they are the safe door, the gatekeeper of these community people. And I'm not going to relinquish with that. I'm going to fight to the teeth to be sure that it doesn't happen again in our community. And a lot of the doctors and employees understand what I'm saying. Because I cannot see again myself praying, asking for what we need, and not delivery. And we have to use everything that we have. And I know it's happening. It's happening now. These steps are happening right now. There is a knowledge on that, on different level of our government.
Scott, what do you think needs to happen with healthcare?
Well, one of the big lessons, and Celeste mentioned it or touched on it, that we learned during the pandemic is that we could not get through this as independent healthcare entities. We had to come together. We had to share resources. We had to share staff. We had to share space. And there's too much, I think, not appreciating the role that community-based organizations play. And people wonder, you know, okay, this local community hospital is going to be taken over by a larger system, we'll get some efficiencies. You're going to lose the connection to the community. You're going to lose the relationships with those community-based organizations. And if we're going to move forward and use the lessons that we learned, we have to do it together. It cannot be done unilaterally.
Celeste, from the government's point of view, what actions do you think need to be taken with the healthcare system to help create that hopeful future in New York State?
Well, as I mentioned before, you know, the actions with the Medicaid waiver that has been submitted, the recognition that more money, more focus, and more collaborations with community-based organizations, people on the ground. I think Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. Mm-hmm. It applies here to this model. You have to listen to the voices of people who are in need. That's the only way you can change the paradigm. That's the only way that you can move healthcare and access into communities that absolutely need it. So the future, the department learned and the counties made it very clear that we were to understand the past, mistakes or oversight, if I can use that word, that were made, and you're aware of that, Dr. Talaj. So the future, we're optimistic that we've learned a hard lesson, but that we're able to pivot, and through legislation and budget appropriations and a focus on the community and the folks that care and provide care in the communities, in order to partner, have deep partnerships. That's the future, I think. I'm speaking for the department, and I believe that that's the route that we need to all take.
Well, on that note, I want to thank all of our panelists for such a thoughtful discussion, a hopeful discussion looking forward. And as we keep our gaze on that horizon, we are also, of course, keeping very close to our hearts the memories of those that we lost during the pandemic. And that is also part of the reason that we are gathered here tonight. At CBS News, one of those who we lost was our own beloved Maria Mercader. She died of COVID in March of 2020. To know Maria was to love her, David, yeah, would you say? She was a mentor, she was a confidant, she was a guiding spirit to so many at CBS News, including myself, and she really was the embodiment of her deeply held Catholic values. So what I want to do right now is go ahead and share with you a bit of her legacy. This is from my CBS News colleague, Anthony Mason.
To know Maria was to love Maria. For me, Maria was not just a photograph and a video. She was a dear friend. I had known Maria since childhood. She was my sister's best friend in high school, and she was a second older sister to me. We are actually honored to have Maria's brother Manuel with us tonight, who helped, yes. Manuel was instrumental in helping us coordinate with our friends at CBS, and I'm so grateful to him and to CBS for being part of tonight. You know, Maria was special for many reasons, but one of the reasons was she was special because she made everyone feel special. And as the video showed, in her career, she got to rub elbows with many famous people, presidents and celebrities, but she treated everyone like a president and a celebrity. There was no unimportant person for Maria. You know, many of her words and pleasing smile healed many saddened hearts and wounded people, even though she had to deal with her own woundedness for many, many years. And what got her through those times was, in addition to being an exceptional professional, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and producer, was she was a woman of deep faith. And as the video referenced, she had a deep devotion to Saint Therese of Lisieux, also known as the Little Flower. And tradition holds that when you ask Saint Therese to intercede for you for whatever cause, you would receive proof of her intercessory assistance by receiving a rose. And that's why she got the name of the Little Rose. And throughout the years, Saint Therese never let Maria down. Except once, and I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I was on the phone with Maria, and she was upset because she was praying for St. Therese's help, and she didn't get her rose. And she thought maybe this time it wasn't, maybe St. Therese was busy with someone else. As we were on the phone, I was actually listening to Maria with one ear and watching the All-Star game with the other ear. And as I was talking to Maria, the commentator on the baseball broadcast said, "And now we are going to interview Pete Rose." And I said, "Maria, I think you just got your rose." So in that spirit, I guess if we've learned anything these past 2 years, it's gratitude. Gratitude even for little things like to be together in a space like together tonight. So in that spirit of gratitude and to honor Maria and her devotion to Saint Teresa, I would like to present our panelists with some roses. So. So once again, just to echo Elaine, I want to thank our panelists. Elaine, thank you so much. Your Eminence, you're welcome. Scott, David, Assistant Commissioner Celeste, and Dr. Talaj, thank you so much for being here. And most importantly, thank you all for being here. And we're going to ask our panelists now to leave, but we are going to end with some more music. So again, let's give one more hand to the Metro Music Singers. Thank you very much.
before we do what would be the closing song tonight, let me take the opportunity to thank the panelists for a wonderful discussion. I think we've all been enlightened. And if you don't mind, let's just give them another round of applause tonight. And then I'm going to ask you to stand just for a moment. Portraits of Grace, and I think we heard a little bit of it tonight, that we're able to stand here tonight because of the grace extended to us by the Almighty God. So there's a little chorus, a little hymn that says, and sing along with us, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but Thank you, and good night.